When my mother-in-law called 911 screaming that I had kidnapped my own daughter from the park, I thought my life was over. I was standing there holding my 3-year-old little girl in my arms, watching her eat an ice cream cone, when suddenly 2 police cars pulled up with their lights flashing and officers jumped out with their hands on their weapons yelling at me to put the child down and step away. My daughter started crying and dropped her ice cream, and I felt my heart stop completely because I had no idea what was happening or why these officers were treating me like a criminal when I was just spending a Saturday afternoon with my own baby girl. I put my daughter down slowly and raised my hands while trying to explain that I was her father, that I had custody paperwork in my wallet, that this was all a huge mistake. But the officers weren't listening because dispatch had told them a man matching my description had grabbed a screaming child and was attempting to flee the scene. None of that was true, but someone had called it in and they had to respond as if it were a real kidnapping in progress. My daughter was screaming for me and reaching her arms out, but they wouldn't let me comfort her, and that was the worst feeling I have ever experienced in my entire life. Then I saw her. My mother-in-law standing about 50 feet away with her phone still in her hand and a satisfied smile on her face that made my blood run cold. She had done this. She had called the police on me while I was spending time with my own child at a public park. I tried to tell the officers, but they weren't ready to listen yet. They had to secure the scene first and verify the child's identity and make sure she was safe. Meanwhile, my daughter was hysterical and my mother-in-law was walking toward us with fake tears streaming down her face, playing the concerned grandmother role perfectly. The officers separated us and started asking questions. One stayed with me while another went to talk to my mother-in-law, who I could see was putting on an Oscar-worthy performance, dabbing at her eyes and gesturing dramatically toward me and my daughter. A female officer was trying to calm my little girl down, but she kept screaming "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy" and reaching for me, and I wanted to scream too, but I knew that would only make things worse, so I forced myself to stay calm and answer every question they asked me. I gave them my driver's license and explained that I had full custody paperwork at home, that my wife and I were married and living together, that her mother had never approved of our marriage and had been trying to cause problems since day one. The officer was skeptical at first, but he could see my daughter clearly recognized me and was crying for me specifically. He asked if I could call someone to verify my identity, and I immediately called my wife, who answered on the second ring, and I could barely get the words out to tell her what was happening. My wife's voice went from confused to furious in about 2 seconds flat. She told the officer that yes, I was her husband, yes, that was our daughter, and yes, her mother had been warned multiple times to stop interfering in our lives. She said she was on her way and hung up without saying goodbye because she was that angry. The officer's demeanor changed slightly and he started looking at my mother-in-law with more suspicion. Meanwhile, she was still over there crying and playing the victim, but her act was starting to fall apart. My wife arrived in 15 minutes, which meant she had definitely been speeding, but nobody was going to give her a ticket under these circumstances. She jumped out of her car and ran straight to our daughter, scooping her up and holding her tight while glaring at her mother with pure hatred in her eyes. I had never seen my wife look at anyone like that before, and honestly it scared me a little bit. She was always the peacemaker in her family, always trying to smooth things over and give her mother another chance, but this time was different. The police were now very interested in talking to my mother-in-law again. One of the officers had been reviewing the 911 call on his radio, and the description she gave did not match what they found at the scene. She had said I was dragging a screaming child toward a white van when in reality I was sitting on a park bench watching my daughter play on the swings before buying her ice cream from a vendor. There was no white van anywhere in the parking lot. She had lied to emergency services, and that was a serious crime. My mother-in-law started backpedaling immediately, saying she must have been confused, saying she saw the situation from far away and panicked, saying she was just a concerned grandmother trying to protect her granddaughter. But the officers weren't buying it anymore. One of them asked her to show them where she had been standing when she made the call, and she pointed to a spot that was maybe 30 feet from where I had been sitting. There was no way she could have mistaken me for a kidnapper from that distance, especially since she obviously knew exactly who I was. Then one of the officers noticed something. My mother-in-law had a large rolling suitcase with her at the park, which was strange for someone who was supposedly just out for a walk when they witnessed a kidnapping. He asked her why she had luggage with her, and she stumbled over her words, saying she was going to visit a friend later. The officer asked if he could look inside the suitcase, and she hesitated just long enough to make everyone suspicious. She said she would prefer if they didn't, but she didn't say no outright, which gave them reasonable cause to ask again more firmly. What they found inside that suitcase changed everything. There were clothes packed for a child. My daughter's clothes specifically, items that had gone missing from our house over the past few weeks that we thought we had simply misplaced. There was a car seat base still in the packaging. There was an envelope stuffed with cash, more money than any reasonable person would carry around for a casual visit to a friend. And there at the bottom of the suitcase, wrapped in a sweater, were 2 passports with my daughter's photo but a different name and my mother-in-law listed as her guardian. The officer held up the passports and asked my mother-in-law to explain what these were. Her face went completely white and she started stammering that she could explain, that it wasn't what it looked like, that she was just trying to protect her granddaughter from an unstable home environment. My wife grabbed those passports and looked at them and let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob. It was something primal and broken that I never want to hear again for the rest of my life. The passports were fake, but they were good fakes, the kind that cost serious money and require connections to obtain. My mother-in-law had clearly been planning this for a long time, gathering my daughter's belongings piece by piece, saving up cash, obtaining fraudulent travel documents. She had been planning to kidnap my daughter and take her out of the country, and we never would have seen her again. The 911 call wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing, it was part of her plan. She was going to have me arrested and then somehow get access to my daughter while I was in custody and disappear with her forever. The police arrested my mother-in-law on the spot. They read her rights while she cried and begged and tried to explain that she was doing this for the good of the child, that we weren't fit parents, that my daughter would be better off with her. Nobody was listening anymore. They put her in handcuffs and walked her to one of the police cars while my wife held our daughter and I stood there trying to process what had just happened. My mother-in-law screamed at my wife through the car window, saying she was making a mistake, saying she would regret taking my side, saying this wasn't over. We had to go to the police station to give full statements and that took hours. My daughter was exhausted and confused and kept asking why grandma was in trouble and we didn't know what to tell her. How do you explain to a 3-year-old that her grandmother was planning to steal her away from her parents and take her to another country? We just told her that grandma had made some bad choices and needed a timeout, which felt inadequate, but what else could we say? The detective who took our statements was thorough and patient. He explained that my mother-in-law was facing multiple serious charges including filing a false police report, attempted kidnapping, possession of fraudulent documents, and conspiracy to commit international parental kidnapping. The fake passports alone were a federal crime that would involve agencies beyond the local police. My mother-in-law had stepped into territory that she clearly didn't understand when she decided to pursue this plan. Over the next few days, the investigation revealed the full scope of what my mother-in-law had been planning. She had purchased plane tickets to a country that didn't have an extradition treaty with the United States. She had rented an apartment there under a fake name. She had been in contact with people who specialized in helping parents or grandparents disappear with children, which is apparently a whole underground industry that exists for custody disputes. She had been planning this for at least 6 months based on the evidence they found on her phone and computer. My wife was devastated. She had always known her mother was controlling and difficult, but she never imagined she was capable of something like this. She kept asking herself what she had missed, what signs she should have seen, how her mother could have been planning to steal her child right under her nose. I held her while she cried and told her this wasn't her fault, that her mother had fooled everyone, that we couldn't have known because normal people don't expect their family members to plan international kidnapping schemes. The phone calls started almost immediately. My mother-in-law's side of the family began reaching out, first to express shock and then increasingly to defend her. They said she must have had her reasons. They said we must have done something to provoke this. They said we should drop the charges and handle this as a family matter. My wife's aunt actually had the nerve to say that maybe her mother was right and we weren't fit parents if we couldn't even keep track of our daughter's belongings going missing. My wife hung up on her and blocked her number. We learned that my mother-in-law had been telling her side of the family horrible lies about us for years. She had told them that I was abusive, that my wife was on drugs, that our daughter was neglected and living in squalor. None of this was true, but she had been building this narrative for so long that they believed her completely. When the arrest happened, they assumed we had somehow framed her or that the police had made a mistake. The idea that sweet concerned grandma was actually a criminal mastermind didn't fit their worldview. The fake passports were traced back to a forger who operated out of a nearby city. He had created documents for my mother-in-law and at least a dozen other people who were trying to disappear with children who weren't legally theirs. The FBI got involved at that point because this was part of a larger operation. My mother-in-law's case became connected to a federal investigation and suddenly she was facing the possibility of serious federal prison time, not just state charges. My wife and I had to get a lawyer to make sure our interests were protected throughout this process. He was recommended by the detective and specialized in cases involving parental kidnapping attempts. He told us that we were lucky, incredibly lucky, that the plan had fallen apart before my mother-in-law could execute it. He had seen cases where grandparents or ex-spouses successfully disappeared with children and those kids were never found. The parents spent years searching and hoping and never getting closure. The lawyer helped us file for a restraining order that would prevent my mother-in-law from having any contact with us or our daughter even if she somehow got out on bail. The judge granted it immediately given the severity of the charges. He also helped us draft a statement for the media because somehow the story had leaked and there were reporters calling our house asking for interviews. We declined all requests because we didn't want our daughter's face plastered all over the news, but we did release a short statement thanking the police and asking for privacy. My mother-in-law's lawyer tried to argue that she should be released on bail because she wasn't a flight risk and had ties to the community. The prosecutor laughed at that and pointed out that she had fake passports and plane tickets to a country without extradition, which pretty much defined flight risk. The judge agreed and denied bail. My mother-in-law would be staying in jail until her trial. I wasn't happy about that exactly, but I would be lying if I said I was sad about it either. My wife had to go through her childhood home with investigators to help them find any additional evidence. She said walking through those rooms knowing what her mother had been planning felt like walking through a stranger's house. She found notebooks filled with her mother's handwriting documenting our comings and goings, notes about my work schedule, my wife's routine, when we usually went to the park, what routes we typically took. Her mother had been surveilling us like we were targets instead of family. The most disturbing thing they found was a journal where my mother-in-law had written about her plans in detail. She wrote about how she was going to raise my daughter the right way, away from us, how she would be both mother and grandmother to her, how my daughter would eventually forget us and bond with her completely. She had names picked out for the new identity she was going to create for my daughter. She had written about celebrating birthdays and holidays and first days of school, all in a country where we would never find them. Reading excerpts from that journal that the prosecutor shared with us made me physically ill. This woman had sat across from us at holiday dinners, had held my daughter at birthday parties, had pretended to be a loving grandmother while secretly planning to erase us from our daughter's life completely. The level of deception required to maintain that facade for months or years while executing this plan was sociopathic. My wife said she felt like she never really knew her mother at all, and I think she was right. The trial preparation took months because of the federal involvement. My mother-in-law's lawyer tried various strategies to reduce the charges or get some thrown out. He argued that she hadn't actually kidnapped anyone, so the kidnapping charge shouldn't apply. The prosecutor countered with evidence of substantial steps taken toward completing the crime, which legally constituted attempted kidnapping even if the act itself was interrupted. The judge agreed with the prosecutor. We had to testify at several hearings and each time was emotionally exhausting. Having to sit in the same room as my mother-in-law while lawyers discussed her plan to steal my child felt surreal and horrible. She would look at my wife sometimes with this expression of betrayed innocence, like she was the victim here, like her own daughter had wronged her by not allowing her to kidnap her grandchild. My wife stopped looking back after the first few hearings because it was too painful. The guilty verdict came after a 3-week trial. My mother-in-law was convicted on all charges including attempted kidnapping, conspiracy, possession of fraudulent documents, and filing a false police report. The federal charges related to the fake passports added additional convictions. The forger she had used had already pleaded guilty and testified against her in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony had been damning, describing in detail the meetings where my mother-in-law discussed her plans to disappear with my daughter. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 months after the verdict. The prosecutor argued for the maximum sentence given the premeditated nature of the crime and the potential trauma to the child. My mother-in-law's lawyer argued for leniency given her age and lack of prior criminal record. My wife and I were given the opportunity to make victim impact statements and we both took it. My wife's statement was particularly powerful, describing the betrayal of discovering her own mother had been planning to steal her child and raise her in hiding. The judge sentenced my mother-in-law to 15 years in federal prison. She would be eligible for parole after serving at least 12 years. She was 71 years old at sentencing, which meant she would likely spend the rest of her life in prison. When the sentence was announced, she collapsed in her chair and her lawyer had to help her stand. My wife cried, but I couldn't tell if it was from relief or grief or both. Probably both. After the sentencing, my wife's extended family split into two camps. Some of them finally accepted that my mother-in-law had done something unforgivable and reached out to apologize for not believing us earlier. Others doubled down on defending her, saying the sentence was too harsh, saying we should have pleaded for mercy, saying family should forgive family no matter what. My wife cut ties with everyone in the second group and I fully supported that decision. We moved to a different city 6 months after the trial. We couldn't stay in a place where every grocery store and park and street corner reminded us of what had almost happened. We needed a fresh start somewhere nobody knew our story, where our daughter could grow up without the shadow of what her grandmother had tried to do hanging over her. The move was hard but necessary for our mental health and our family's future. We put our daughter in therapy to help her process what she could understand about the situation. The therapist specialized in young children and used play therapy to help her work through her feelings. My daughter didn't fully understand what grandma had done wrong, but she knew grandma was gone and wouldn't be coming back, and that made her sad sometimes. We told her age-appropriate truths and promised to tell her more when she was older. My wife also started therapy to deal with the complicated grief of losing her mother to her own actions. Her mother was still alive but effectively dead to her, locked away for crimes against her own family. The therapist helped her understand that she could grieve the loss of the mother she thought she had while also feeling relief and anger at the mother who actually existed. It was a complicated emotional landscape to navigate, but she made progress every month. I had my own issues to work through. The image of those police officers treating me like a criminal while my daughter cried for me still haunted my dreams sometimes. The knowledge that my mother-in-law had been watching and documenting our lives for months made me paranoid about our privacy and security in ways I hadn't been before. I became hypervigilant about who had access to information about our family, who could see our address, who might be watching. The years passed and life slowly returned to something resembling normal. Our daughter grew up healthy and happy, knowing only that grandma had made bad choices and had to go away. We didn't lie to her, but we didn't burden her with details she couldn't process either. When she asked about grandma, we answered honestly but simply and then redirected to something positive. She stopped asking as frequently as she got older. When our daughter was 10 years old, my mother-in-law died in prison. She had developed health problems that the prison medical system couldn't adequately treat, and she passed away in a hospital under guard. My wife received notification from the prison and sat with the letter for a long time before telling me. She didn't cry, but she was quiet for days, processing feelings that she couldn't articulate even after years of therapy. We had to decide whether to tell our daughter and what to tell her. The therapist recommended being honest in an age-appropriate way, so we sat her down and explained that grandma had passed away. Our daughter asked if she should feel sad, and we told her she could feel whatever she felt, that all her emotions were valid. She said she felt weird because she barely remembered grandma, but she knew grandma was family. We told her that was okay too. My wife went through her mother's belongings that the prison returned to her. There wasn't much, just some photos and letters and a few personal items. Among the letters were several addressed to my wife that my mother-in-law had written but never sent. In them she alternated between apologizing and blaming us, between expressing regret and insisting she had been right. It was clear that even after years in prison she had never fully accepted responsibility for what she had done. One letter in particular stood out. It was written just a few weeks before my mother-in-law died, and in it she said she forgave my wife for testifying against her. Not asked for forgiveness but forgave, as if my wife was the one who had wronged her. My wife read that line and finally cried, deep heaving sobs that released years of complicated grief. She had wanted her mother to take responsibility, to truly apologize, and even in death her mother couldn't give her that. We held a small private ceremony to mark my mother-in-law's passing. Not a funeral exactly, just the three of us and a few of my wife's relatives who had taken our side over the years. My wife said a few words about the mother she remembered from childhood, before things went wrong, before the obsession and the planning and the fake passports. She acknowledged the good memories while also acknowledging the truth of what her mother had become. It felt like closure even if it wasn't perfect closure. Our daughter is 14 now and knows the full story. We told her when she turned 12, sitting her down with photo albums and newspaper clippings and the patience to answer every question she had. She was angry at first, then sad, then confused about how to feel. She went through her own process of understanding that her grandmother had loved her in a twisted way that manifested as a desire to possess her. It took time, but she came through it stronger. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if my mother-in-law's plan had worked. If the police had believed her story that day at the park. If they had taken me into custody while she swooped in to grab my daughter. If they had made it to the airport and onto that plane before anyone realized what was happening. My daughter would have grown up in another country with a false name, believing lies about her parents, never knowing we were searching for her desperately. The thought of that alternative timeline keeps me up at night sometimes even now. How close we came to losing everything. How one Saturday afternoon at the park almost became the day my family was destroyed forever. We were lucky, and I know we were lucky, and I try not to take a single day with my daughter for granted because I know how easily it could have all been taken away. My wife still struggles sometimes. Mother's Day is hard for her, seeing all the posts about wonderful mothers when her own mother tried to kidnap her child. She doesn't talk to most of her extended family anymore because the ones who defended her mother never truly apologized. She has built a new chosen family of friends and neighbors who don't know her history unless she chooses to share it. She says she's happy and I believe her, but I also know the scars are still there beneath the surface. Our marriage actually grew stronger through all of this. We could have blamed each other, could have let the stress and trauma drive us apart. Instead, we held on to each other tighter. We became a team in a way we hadn't been before. We learned to communicate better, to check in with each other, to make sure we were both okay. The thing that was meant to destroy our family ended up making us more united and resilient. I work from home now so I can be more present for our daughter. My wife went back to school and got a degree in social work, wanting to help other families going through crises. She specializes in custody issues and parental kidnapping prevention, using her experience to help others navigate situations she knows too well. She says it's therapeutic to turn her trauma into something that helps people, and I believe her. Our daughter wants to be a lawyer when she grows up. She says she wants to help people like her dad who get accused of things they didn't do. She's already researching law schools even though college is still 4 years away. I'm proud of her for taking something horrible from her childhood and wanting to transform it into something positive. She's stronger than she knows and more resilient than anyone should have to be. Every year on the anniversary of that day at the park, we do something special as a family. Not to commemorate the trauma but to celebrate the fact that we're still together. We go to a park, always a different one, and have a picnic and play games and take photos. It's our way of reclaiming what that day tried to take from us. My daughter doesn't always want to participate now that she's a teenager, but she usually comes around by the end. The detective who first suspected something was wrong with my mother-in-law's story retired a few years ago. We sent him a gift basket and a letter thanking him for his instincts that day. If he had just taken her story at face value, I might have been arrested and processed before anyone checked the suitcase. His skepticism and thoroughness saved my family. He wrote back saying our letter meant a lot and that our case was one he thought about often. The world feels different to me now than it did before that day at the park. I trust less easily. I look for ulterior motives. I watch how people interact with my daughter with a paranoid eye that I wish I didn't have. But I also appreciate more. I savor the quiet moments of family dinners and movie nights and car rides to soccer practice. I know how fragile happiness is and I try never to forget it. My wife says I saved her that day at the park, but I think we saved each other. If she hadn't believed me immediately when I called, if she had hesitated or questioned the situation, things might have gone differently. Her immediate fierce defense of our family set the tone for everything that followed. We faced her mother together and we dismantled her plan together and we rebuilt our lives together. I don't know what the future holds, but I know we'll face it as a family. My daughter will graduate high school and go to college and build her own life. My wife and I will grow old together, shaped by the trauma we survived but not defined by it. And somewhere in whatever afterlife exists or doesn't exist, my mother-in-law will have to reckon with what she tried to do and what it cost her. The last time I visited my mother-in-law's grave was on the 5th anniversary of her death. My wife didn't want to come and I didn't push her. I stood there alone looking at the headstone with her name and dates and nothing else. No loving mother or beloved grandmother, because those would have been lies. Just her name and the years she lived. I didn't say anything out loud. There was nothing left to say. Walking away from that grave I felt something I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness exactly, I'm not sure I'll ever forgive her for what she tried to do. But something like release. The anger and fear that had lived in my chest for years felt lighter somehow. She was gone and her plans had failed and my daughter was safe and healthy and growing up with parents who loved her. That was the victory that mattered. My mother-in-law called 911 that day planning to destroy my family. Instead she destroyed herself. Every scheme she had constructed, every lie she had told, every document she had forged, it all came crashing down on her the moment that officer opened her suitcase. She spent her final years in a prison cell instead of raising my daughter in some foreign country. The poetic justice of that outcome isn't lost on me even if it doesn't bring any real satisfaction. This story doesn't have a happy ending because real life doesn't work that way. It has a complicated ending, a bittersweet ending, an ending where the good guys won but still carry scars from the battle. My family survived something terrible and will spend the rest of our lives processing what almost happened. But we're together. We're safe. We're okay. And my daughter knows she's loved by parents who will never stop fighting for her no matter what anyone tries to do. That's the only happy ending that really matters. The park where it all happened closed down a few years ago to make room for a housing development. I drove by once when I was in the old neighborhood and saw that the playground equipment was gone, the benches were gone, even the ice cream vendor who used to set up by the entrance was gone. It was just an empty field waiting to become something else. Somehow that felt right. New families will live there soon, playing in backyards where my daughter once played on swings, walking dogs on streets that didn't exist when I was handcuffed in front of my crying child. They won't know what happened there. They won't feel the weight of it. The trauma belongs to us and we carry it with us wherever we go while the physical place transforms into something unrecognizable. I used to dream about that day constantly. Every night for months I would relive the moment when the police cars pulled up, the moment when I saw my mother-in-law's satisfied smile, the moment when they opened the suitcase and everything changed. The dreams were vivid and horrible and left me unable to sleep properly. But they faded over time, becoming less frequent, less vivid, less powerful. Now I might dream about it once or twice a year, usually around the anniversary. My therapist said that was normal. Trauma changes the brain and it takes time and work to heal those changes. The fact that the dreams became less frequent meant my brain was processing the experience and filing it away properly. It would never be completely gone, but it would eventually take its place among all the other memories, neither dominating nor disappearing, just existing as part of my story. I wrote this account because I think it's important for people to know that these things happen. Grandparents who seem loving and normal can have agendas that are anything but. Family members you trust can be planning things you never imagined. The people who pose the greatest threat are often the ones you would never suspect because you love them and love makes us blind to uncomfortable truths. If you're a parent reading this, please take this as a warning to pay attention. Notice if belongings go missing. Notice if family members ask unusual questions about your schedule or routines. Notice if someone seems too interested in being alone with your child. Trust your instincts even when they're telling you something you don't want to believe about someone you love. And if you're going through something similar right now, please know that you're not alone and you're not crazy and your concerns are valid. Document everything. Talk to a lawyer. Make sure the authorities know about your situation before something happens. It's better to seem paranoid and be wrong than to trust and lose everything. My family's story could have ended very differently. We got lucky. We had a detective who asked the right questions and an officer who noticed the suitcase and a system that worked the way it was supposed to work. Not everyone is that lucky. I want to honor our luck by sharing what happened so that maybe someone else can avoid what we went through or catch the warning signs earlier than we did. My daughter asked me recently why I wanted to write all this down. I told her it was because stories have power. The story her grandmother tried to create, where she disappeared with my daughter and we never found them, that story didn't happen because we interrupted it. The story we actually lived, where the truth came out and justice was served, that story happened because people paid attention and took action. By writing this down, I'm making sure our real story exists in the world. Not the story my mother-in-law wanted to tell, where she was the heroic grandmother saving her granddaughter from unfit parents. But the true story, where she was the villain who almost destroyed an innocent family but failed because of her own arrogance and the vigilance of strangers who did their jobs well. This is our story. This is what happened to us. And if sharing it helps even one family avoid what we went through, then reliving the trauma to write these words will have been worth it. Stay vigilant. Trust carefully. Protect your children. And never underestimate what people are capable of, especially the ones you think you know best. That's what my mother-in-law taught me, in the end. The lesson I never wanted to learn but can never forget. The people who can hurt you most are the ones you let closest. And sometimes love isn't enough to make someone safe. Sometimes love is exactly what makes them dangerous. My daughter turned 15 last month and we threw her a birthday party at our new house with her friends from school. I watched her laugh and open presents and blow out candles and I thought about how different her life could have been. She could have been celebrating her 15th birthday in some foreign country with a fake name, believing lies about her parents, never knowing we existed. Instead, she was here surrounded by people who love her and know her real name and her real story. The party was normal in all the ways that matter. Teenagers eating too much cake and playing music too loud and taking pictures for social media. My wife and I stayed in the kitchen mostly, giving them space while keeping an ear out for anything that needed adult intervention. It felt so ordinary and that ordinariness felt like a victory. We had fought for this. We had almost lost this. And now we got to have it. One of my daughter's friends asked her about the framed newspaper article in our hallway. It was from the day after my mother-in-law's arrest, the headline reading, "Grandmother Arrested in Elaborate Kidnapping Plot." We kept it framed as a reminder of what we survived, though we debated many times about whether to take it down. My daughter handled the question with grace, explaining briefly what had happened without making it dramatic. Her friend said that's crazy and my daughter just shrugged and said yeah it kind of was. That casual acceptance of her own history amazed me. When we first told her the full story at 12 she had been so upset, so confused about how to feel. Now at 15 she talked about it like it was just another fact of her life, like having brown eyes or being good at math. The therapist said that was healthy, that she had integrated the trauma into her identity without letting it define her. I hoped that was true, but I also knew she might have feelings about it later that hadn't surfaced yet. After the party, when all her friends had gone home, my daughter helped us clean up and then sat down at the kitchen table with a serious expression. She said she had something she wanted to talk to us about and my heart immediately started racing because that's what happens now whenever someone says they have something serious to discuss. My wife sat down too and we both waited for whatever was coming. My daughter said she had been doing research online about her grandmother's case. She had found court documents and news articles and even some true crime podcasts that mentioned what happened. She said she had listened to one of the podcasts without telling us and she was sorry for keeping it secret, but she needed to understand things on her own terms. My wife reached across the table and took her hand and said we understood. The podcast had included details we hadn't told her yet. About the network of forgers and child traffickers that her grandmother had been connected to. About the other families who had been victimized by the same organization. About the ongoing investigation that had continued even after her grandmother's conviction. My daughter said hearing all of that from strangers' voices had been strange but also clarifying in ways she couldn't explain. She had questions now. Hard questions that we had been putting off answering. She wanted to know if her grandmother had ever actually loved her or if she had just been a possession to be acquired. She wanted to know if there were other people still out there who might try to take her. She wanted to know what would have happened to her if the plan had worked, if she had grown up in another country believing her grandmother's lies. We answered as honestly as we could. We told her that we believed her grandmother did love her in her own broken way, but that her love had become twisted into something possessive and destructive. We told her that the network her grandmother used had been dismantled by federal investigators and that the specific threat to her was over, but that we would always be vigilant about her safety. We told her that if the plan had worked she probably would have grown up confused and isolated, eventually learning the truth somehow and having to rebuild her entire identity. My daughter listened to all of this with a maturity that made me proud and sad at the same time. No 15-year-old should have to think about these things. No child should have to wonder if their grandmother's love was real or just obsession wearing love's mask. She had been robbed of a normal relationship with her extended family and there was nothing we could do to give that back to her. She asked if she could visit her grandmother's grave. We hadn't taken her before because we weren't sure if it was appropriate, but now she was old enough to make that decision for herself. My wife and I looked at each other and communicated silently the way married couples do after enough years together. We both nodded. We would take her whenever she was ready. The visit happened 2 weeks later on a Saturday morning. We drove 3 hours to the cemetery where my mother-in-law was buried, not far from the prison where she had spent her final years. My daughter was quiet during the drive, looking out the window at the passing scenery. My wife held my hand across the center console. None of us knew what to expect from this visit, but we all sensed it was important. The grave was simple and unadorned. Just a flat marker in the grass with my mother-in-law's name and dates. No flowers, no decorations, no evidence that anyone had visited in a long time. My daughter stood in front of it for several minutes without speaking. My wife and I hung back, giving her space to feel whatever she needed to feel. When my daughter finally spoke, her voice was steady but soft. She said, "Hi, Grandma." She said she didn't really know what to say because she didn't really remember her. She said she knew what Grandma had tried to do and she understood why her parents had kept her away. She said she wished things had been different, that Grandma had gotten help instead of planning something terrible, that they could have had a real relationship built on truth instead of whatever this was. Then she said something that surprised all of us, including herself. She said she forgave her grandmother. Not because what she did was okay, because it wasn't and it never would be. But because carrying anger at a dead woman felt pointless and heavy and she didn't want to give her grandmother that power over her life. She said forgiveness was for herself, not for Grandma, and she was choosing to let go of something that would only hurt her to hold on to. My wife started crying. I put my arm around her and tried to hold back my own tears. Our daughter turned around and saw us and came over to hug us both. The three of us stood there in that cemetery holding each other and crying, and somehow it felt like healing. Like all the poison that had been injected into our family by my mother-in-law's actions was finally being flushed out. On the drive home my daughter fell asleep in the back seat like she used to when she was little. My wife and I talked quietly about what had just happened. We agreed that our daughter was handling this better than either of us had at her age, better than either of us would have at any age, honestly. She had a strength and wisdom that amazed us both. We liked to think we had something to do with it, but mostly we just felt lucky. That visit to the grave marked a turning point for our family. Something shifted after that day. The weight we had all been carrying felt lighter. We talked more openly about what had happened, not dwelling on it but not avoiding it either. It became just another part of our family history, terrible but survived, traumatic but overcome. My wife's relationship with her remaining family members also began to shift. Some of the relatives who had defended her mother started reaching out again, not to apologize exactly but to reconnect. My wife was cautious but open. She had coffee with an aunt who had previously accused us of framing her mother. The aunt didn't say sorry, but she also didn't defend my mother-in-law anymore. It was a start. The aunt revealed something during that conversation that we hadn't known. Apparently my mother-in-law had tried to recruit other family members into her scheme before acting alone. She had approached the aunt about helping with the fake passports. She had asked a cousin to scout locations in the country she planned to flee to. They had all refused and thought she would drop the idea. Instead, she had gone ahead without them. This information was disturbing but also oddly comforting. It meant that not everyone in my wife's family had been complicit. Some of them had seen the warning signs and said no. They just hadn't done the next right thing, which was telling someone what my mother-in-law was planning. The aunt cried when she admitted this, saying she never thought her sister would actually go through with it, saying she had nightmares about what might have happened if the plan had worked. My wife forgave her aunt, though it took time and many more conversations. The aunt became an unlikely ally in our lives, someone who understood both sides of the family tragedy and tried to help bridge the gaps that my mother-in-law had created. She was the one who eventually organized a family reunion that included my wife and daughter for the first time in over a decade. That reunion was held at a neutral location, a park in a city where none of us lived. We rented a pavilion and set up tables of food, and everyone brought photos and stories to share. My daughter was nervous about meeting relatives she barely remembered or had never met. We told her she could leave at any time if she felt uncomfortable. She said she wanted to try. The day was awkward at first. People didn't know what to say or how to act around us. There was this elephant in the room, this shared trauma that nobody wanted to address directly. But gradually, slowly, conversations started flowing. People asked my daughter about school and her interests. They complimented my wife on her career. They shook my hand and made small talk about sports and weather. Nobody mentioned my mother-in-law until my daughter brought her up herself. She did it deliberately, I could tell. She asked her great-uncle what grandma was like when she was young. The question hung in the air for a moment, and then the great-uncle smiled sadly and started telling stories about his sister before she became whoever she became at the end. Those stories painted a picture of a woman I had never known. A woman who had been funny and creative and adventurous. A woman who had struggled with their parents' expectations and society's limitations on what women could be in her generation. A woman who had experienced disappointments and losses that slowly hardened her into someone capable of terrible things. It didn't excuse what she did, but it humanized her in a way I hadn't expected. My daughter listened to all of it with rapt attention. She was meeting her grandmother for the first time in a way, learning about the person before the monster. I could see her processing this information, adding it to what she already knew, building a more complete picture of the woman who had tried to steal her. It was complicated work for a 15-year-old, but she seemed to be handling it. The reunion ended with a group photo that included all of us. Looking at it later, I was struck by how normal it looked. Just a big family gathered together, smiling for the camera. You would never guess from looking at it that this family had nearly been torn apart by one member's obsessive plan. You would never know that some of these people hadn't spoken to each other in years because of whose side they had taken. We started attending family events more regularly after that. Not all of them, we still needed boundaries and self-protection, but enough to maintain connections. My daughter developed relationships with cousins she had never known. My wife rebuilt bonds with siblings she had written off as lost. I found myself actually enjoying time with in-laws, something I never would have imagined possible given how things started. The family developed an unspoken rule about my mother-in-law. We could talk about her, but only in certain ways. We could share memories from before she became consumed by her obsession. We could acknowledge the tragedy of what happened without relitigating whose fault it was. We could not defend her actions or suggest that maybe she had been right about something. That line was clear and nobody crossed it. My daughter wrote a college application essay about her experience when she turned 17. We helped her edit it and cried reading the final version. She wrote about resilience and family and the complicated nature of love. She wrote about forgiving someone who didn't deserve forgiveness because she deserved peace. She wrote about learning that people you love can do terrible things and you can still love the memory of who they were before. The essay got her into her top choice school, a prestigious university with a strong pre-law program. She called us screaming with excitement when the acceptance letter came. My wife and I held each other and cried happy tears. Our daughter was going to be okay. More than okay. She was going to thrive. Everything we had been through, everything we had survived, it had led to this moment of pure joy. The summer before she left for college we did a road trip as a family. Just the three of us driving across the country, visiting national parks and roadside attractions and small towns we had never heard of. We took hundreds of photos and ate too much fast food and sang along badly to songs on the radio. It felt like a celebration of our family's survival.